Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and I have a good old-fashioned, wholesome list review show for you today. I hosted a tournament last weekend, called it the Quest for Talaxis, and I can't wait to get to talk to you about the lists that people brought. Lots of really cool stuff. So I'm too many players, 24 players, really cool. 24 players, too many to go through every single list, but I thought I'd try to go through about half of them. Quite a few people went 2 and 2, but a few ones. Chris went 2 and 2 with the starter set, one box, Untamed Beasts, way back in the day with the throwback there. You love to see that. Incredible job by Chris. Also, Ambrose also going 2 and 2 with a one box, like just one set warband with Jade Obelisk. Both of you two are absolute legends. Yeah, love to see people bring out the one box bespoke warbands and manage to win some games. So great job by you guys. Also running a bespoke warband was Josh, 2 and 2 with Dark Oath Savagers. I was talking to him after the tournament, and he said that he heard me on a couple videos ago. You can go check it out. I talked about how one of the only things that the stats are really clear on is that Dark Oath Savagers are bad. A few people have actually kind of taken up my challenge with that and tried to tune up pretty hard-hitting Dark Oath Savagers lists. I still think Dark Oath Savagers are really bad, but going 2 and 2 with them, hey, that's really good. So he went with a Cygor. Cool little synergy here, right? Because of course your God Speaker is generating extra wild dice. The Cygor is even more wild dice hungry than your average monster because he's trying to throw boulders everywhere, right? That takes up dice. So having the God Speaker there with the Cygor is, at least in theory, a really nice little synergy. Whether or not it's good enough as a synergy to make up for how weak Dark Oath Savagers are on their own is sort of a separate thing, but Josh did pretty well and had a chance to go 3 and 1 there at the end, and I think got a little unlucky, got netted all 3 rounds with no failed nets, which, you know, has got to hurt. Some interesting things here as far as what he chose to leave at home. I'm always interested when people tune up their bespoke warbands. I'm always interested with what they leave on the cutting room floor. Here, no Wrath Touched and only 1 proven. I definitely agree on cutting the Wrath Touched. I can never decide what else I would want to cut from Dark Oath. It's a tough one to really dig into, but cutting the Wrath Touched I definitely agree with. And then he only went with 1 proven, which is interesting, and I'd be interested to hear his thoughts on sort of how he decided between the proven versus the glory seekers. Some more fun lists at 2 and 2 here, the spooky ones. There was Matt with Night Haunt, 2 Dreadblade Harrow, 3 Murmurn Banshee, and a Spirit Host. Night Haunt were so bad in first edition, and it's really nice to see them doing well this one. They are really cool. This is a playstyle that might be for you, it might not be for you. But 2 different Night Haunt players got 2 wins at my tournament, which is pretty cool to see. And in general, from what I've seen of Night Haunt, they're very good at playing the missions and not that great at playing the opposing warband. But that's okay because it's really hard to clear them off the board, of course, because they have that resurrection ability. So if that kind of playstyle appeals to you, and I think it appeals to a lot of people. I know most people like to just like charge, attack, roll dice at your opponent, but a lot of folks also like to kind of dance around and sort of just grab the gold and go. Night Haunt are good at that, and Night Haunt are good at, you know, running around like catching treasures and, you know, using all the terrain, all of that. I think the fact that we played on really heavy terrain boards, I think, was probably a nice benefit for Night Haunt. I think Warcry in general benefits from having quite a bit of terrain on the board, and Night Haunt are no exception there. Really cool list. I also just really like how focused it is. I do think Murmurn Banshees are probably the best of the cheap Night Haunt units. And Spirit Hosts are interesting. They can put out damage, and they're one of the few Night Haunt things that can do that. Let's get into Cody with Soulblight Gravelords. A Necromancer, a White King on horse. 5 Graveguard, and a Seneschal. Cody was also just a dice roller 2 from going 3-1, and was the only person to beat one of the other 3-1 ones. For example, I think Cody had a very high opponent win rate, let's say. I'd say Cody played a lot of the best players at the tournament, or a lot of the best performing lists at the tournament. He kind of skipped the flying combos that you can get with Soulblight Gravelords. A lot of people play Vargoyles with them. A lot of people will bring in a Dreadblade Harrow ally. I do think it's more thematic this way. It was a Necromancer plus all of their skeletons and bones, which I think is a much more flavorful thematic way to play Soulblight Gravelords, and pretty successful. I'd be interested in hearing how the games went, because I noticed that Cody won the treasure missions and actually lost the objective missions, which is, I would think, would be the opposite of how I would have predicted this type of build for Soulblight Gravelords to go. Now, of course, it's not like they're dead in the water of treasure missions. I mean, obviously he won them, but also there's the fact that they just win fights. And I know there was, well, one of the 3-in-1 lists, I'll get to it, but I know that he beat it on a mission that really just involves 3 fights on the board, which, of course, you know, those Graveguard, there's nothing better at winning those. So really interesting list, and I think one that a lot of folks could try. It's not too hard to build this, or build something similar to this, with just the start collecting, so I also think that that's a good little thing for people to try. By the way, this is another one where if we ran the tournament back 10 times, right, I would think that this would be one of the scariest lists at the tournament, and I do think Cody was maybe a little unlucky a couple times. Some more fun lists at 2-2. We see a ton of Slaves to Darkness. This is one of the most popular factions, as it should be. There's sort of no more Warcry faction than this one, although, you know, maybe less so now that we've moved to Gur. So first I'll go through Emily's list. She was playing an Aspiring Champion, 2 Chaos Warhounds, a Chaos Knight with Lance and Shield, which is sort of a baby Varangard. They're actually pretty good point for point. 2 Chaos Warriors, and then 4 Marauders. She said that the Marauders hit above their weight, and that she missed not having a Varangard, and I think both of those are really interesting because, one, I know a lot of people, when they talk about their chaff, they're like, well, they don't really do anything except wait. But I've always been of the opinion that you can usually leverage your chaff for a lot of damage for how much they've got. And yeah, it's like damage that brackets down, right? Because once one of them dies, then it's less damage. But it's often your most efficient point for point source of damage. So I thought it was interesting that Emily said that she felt like over the course of the tournament, the Marauders were very, very good. Like I said before, I do think Chaos Knights are good, but I can definitely see why she would have preferred to see the Varangard there. Now, Ian went actually kind of a similar route, right? Also had a Chaos Warhound, also had some Chaos Warriors, in this case 3 Chaos Warriors instead of 2. Also had 1 mounted fighter, in this case the Centaurian Marshal. Ian's warband was painted immaculately, by the way. He just didn't put it out for paint judging, which is why I didn't get it into my black box for the hobby showcase video that I did for this tournament. But did pretty well, 2-2. I have always considered 2-2 to be a really solid showing. Chaos Lords, I think, are really good. If you like foot heroes in general, I think Chaos Lord is one of the more attractive ones because you've got the spear, you've got a lot of armor, you've got good damage output. It's just like, it's got a little bit of everything that you would want in a foot hero. And then I'd be curious to see how Ian felt like the Centaurian Marshal did for him. You know, I know my friend JJ, he ran one, he went 1-3 in this tournament. It feels like the Centaurian Marshal is more of a flavor pick, but he just loves it so much he runs it anyway. I'd be curious to see how it did for Ian. Chaos Warriors, I think, are good and solid, so going up to 3 of them I think is reasonable, and I'd be curious to see if he ever used the Warhound reaction there. Be curious for that with Emily too, but hopefully maybe one of them is watching and they'll post in the comments how the Warhounds were for them. Now we're going into people who ended above 500. This is 2 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. I'm going to start with Nick with Cruel Boys. He had a Rocket Troggoth, 2 Gut Rippers with Spear, another Rocket Troggoth, 2 Gut Rippers with Spear, a Killaboss, 3 Stab Grots. Most of these lists I'm not breaking down into Hammer, Dagger, and Shield. If you saw me not break it down into the deployment groups and you felt like your deployment groups were really, really important to your strategy, holler at me in the comments. For this one I am, because Nick has been kind of tinkering very slowly with Cruel Boys over the last maybe 2 or 3 months or so, and has gotten to a really interesting place, and I wanted to kind of talk about that with the way it relates to deployment groups. The Hammer and the Shield here of just a Rocket Troggoth with 2 Gut Rippers, I think, and I think he thinks this too, I think he's really unlocked something here. Maybe, potentially a faction-defining build. They just have an incredible amount of utility and defense. They're absolutely immovable. Gut Rippers are very tanky for their points, only 75 points for a toughness 4, 15 wounds at toughness 4 for only 75 points. That's a great deal. And then the 2-inch reach on the spear lets them kind of not have to move around much, can be very patient with them. They can always get an attack in whenever they need. And then, of course, the Rocket Troggoths are interesting where the damage output is really only good if you're using Onslaught on them. So you have to kind of, choose which one of the 2 Troggoths is going to have good damage output. But regardless of which one you're giving dice to, they are incredible at just surviving hits. It takes an incredible amount of resources to take one out. I've played against Troggoths a few times. You often have to dedicate like 300 points worth of fighters to kill one in any kind of reasonable time frame, and you'll win that fight, but that's 300 points of your army that's dedicated to winning that fight against a single Trog. So that's a really nice piece to have, and they give you, just having 2 deployment groups like that just gives you a lot of sustainability and board control with reasonable numbers too. You're on pace to have 9 fighters. Now, this all kind of depends on what you do with your dagger. Nick said that he never used the Stab Grot triple once the whole tournament, which is too bad because this dagger is clearly built to sort of maximize the Stab Grot triple. I kind of agree with using the Killaboss with Haka and Flail if you're not going to try to make the Gnash Tooth work, and I think there's a lot of good reasons not to try to make it work. It is decent. It's got like a really high impact on the game, as it should for 330 points. But the fact that it's a third of your warband and can sometimes be awkward on terrain with just like how big the base is on the Gnash Tooth, I think if you're not going with the Gnash Tooth, I think the Killaboss is definitely the best combat hero that you can do. And I don't know if people have had success or not with the Swamp Kala Shaman. Its ability is okay, but not, I think, as competitive as just having a really good fighter in that slot. So the real question is, if Nick felt like the Stab Grots were not necessarily dead weight, but certainly less good than the rest of his list, the question is, what would you do with the 140 points that he's got open here? One possibility is maybe going for 2 Gabapaloozas. One is possibly an Ardboy boss as an ally. The Ardboy boss is just like really a blender in combat for how many points it is. For only 135 points, you'd be hard-pressed to find something that's scarier to fight. So I think both of those could be different options that people could test out if they have Cruel Boys stuff and they want to try this out. It's also an incredibly well-themed list because the AOS version of Cruel Boys are supposed to lean on their monsters, but they don't have monster equivalents in Warcry. None of the, like the Mire Brute Troggoth, for example, is too big for Warcry, and the Gnash Tooth is really the only middle-sized monster that the Cruel Boys can bring in Warcry. And so having the Rocket Troggoths in there feels incredibly Cruel Boys. So this is a really hard list, a really tough list that's also very thematic. And I think that people should try this out because I know a lot of folks out there have Cruel Boys because of their Dominion boxes. And so this is just like Dominion stuff plus Troggoths plus whatever you want to try to put 75 points in, or 140 points into. Now I'm going to get into what might have been the people's champion of list building at the event, which is Mike, who went with 3 Korgoraths in Khorne here. Now I don't remember which was in which deployment group, but the 3 Korgoraths were split, and then each one was babysat by either Great Bray Shaman or a Blood Reaver Chieftain. Really legendary. So one of Mike's thoughts that I thought was really interesting was, if you're going to run Korgoraths in your list, you should either be running one of them or 3 of them, which I thought was a fascinating insight. He's run 2 in narrative for a really long time, is what he told me, and basically if you're running 2, you're usually running a list that is still Korgorath centered and revolves around the damage that Korgoraths give you. Korgoraths are weirdly efficient for their price point. Their sort of points efficiency in terms of just how hard they are to kill versus how much damage they do, that sort of points efficiency is kind of what GW usually gives you on like quality 80-point models, not 205-point models. It's very rare that they carry that efficiency up into those high points costs. So really powerful. Also has a little ranged attack that sometimes comes in useful. But what he was saying is, lists with Korgoraths, if you're running multiples, Korgoraths are probably your whole offense, in which case having a single deployment group without one can get a little awkward. But running 3 of them, sort of you have one everywhere that you want it. And then the other thing is, running 1 Korgorath can be really good if you just have a list that's 800 points of something else, and then you just add a Korgorath to it, and it's just a really nice beatdown piece that is just kind of self-contained. So interesting Korgorath list building advice there from Mike. I know there's a lot of Korgorath fans out there, so hopefully that's helpful for you. Last 2 1-in-1 list was another Nighthaunt list, so this was a good tournament for Nighthaunt. Nighthaunt players are starting to realize that the new edition is just a little bit friendlier to what they do. This player was just running a little bit of everything. I don't know why I don't have their name up here. I'm pretty sure this was David. I'd love to hear, if you're watching in the comments, I'd love to hear kind of what you were thinking with this. This kind of goes along with a formula that often works in Warcry of 3 somewhat expensive things with then as much of the cheap stuff that you've got left that you can fit, as far as the Dreadblade Harrow, the Guardian of Souls, and the Spirit Torment. But the Guardian of Souls and Spirit Torment don't really output a ton of damage, so I'd be really interested to hear about the playstyle here. I'm assuming, from what I know about Nighthaunt, that this is more of kind of just always play the mission. Don't worry about your opponent too much, and except for maybe if you have to get 1 surgical strike on them, which you can usually get with your flying. But play the mission, use the terrain to your advantage, be on top of terrain as often as you can, that kind of thing with Nighthaunt. That can be very effective, and I think it's a play style that anyone who's interested should definitely look into it. So, going to get into the 3-in-1 and 4-0 lists here. Before I do, by the way, that tournament went so well that we're just going to announce the date for the next one right away. Sunday, March 12th, 2 weeks before Adepticon. We're planning for a 3-round event, but if there's people who have traveled to get there, if people, you know, end of 3 rounds they really want to play, what we'll do is we'll do like 1 bonus round where people can grudge match each other, and I'll count it towards the final stats, but I'll give away best general at the end of the 3rd round. This is 2 weeks before Adepticon, so people are going to be trying out their lists for the various Adepticon tournaments, which means some people are going to be trying out their lists for the competitive tournament, some people are going to be trying out their lists for the narrative tournament. Will be interesting to see those 2 kind of paradigms interact, but I'm really excited, and yeah, it's going to be a good time. The last tournament was a great time, so I'm excited there. Also, you know, if you like these types of list reviews, consider joining the Patreon. If you haven't subscribed already to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and please hit this video with a like if you're interested in list reviews of other tournaments going forward. So, Skaven. This list went 3-in-1 and is really exciting. And so let me get into why. First, we've got 2 Deathmasters, 2 Storm Vermin, a Warp Fire Thrower, and a Hell Pit Abomination. Now, you might not it might not be apparent at first, but there's actually some really nice little combos with this list that I really like. Deathmasters are incredibly good at killing stuff. They're cool because they move 7, which is 1 inch more than most Skaven move. And so they can fly across the board, they can do a ton of damage. The issue is they're very glass cannony. I think they've got like 18 wounds or something. They've got very few wounds and low toughness. They blow up as soon as as soon as something gets onto them, they blow up. And this list doesn't have a lot of numbers because all the Skaven are really expensive now. All the cheap Skaven are super expensive, so you kind of can't build them as a swarm the way you used to want to. So what do you do, right? Enter Hired Bodyguard. Storm Vermin are an interesting case in Skaven because all of the cheap models that used to be much cheaper than them, all are now barely cheaper than them, or sometimes the same price. So they've gone from being kind of a heavy semi-elite choice to just the same as all the chaff. So I've noticed a lot of people are starting to play Storm Vermin in their Skaven lists, even without combos. They're just like, I need some cheaper bodies, and these are just better point for point than my other ones. But you're kind of wasting a lot of their efficacy there because, for example, let's say you've got Hired Bodyguard. I should just give what this is. It means you can't, once you've used Hired Bodyguard, it's a double, you can't attack a hero that's 1 inch away from the Storm Vermin that did the ability until that Storm Vermin is dead. Really cool because it lets you keep a leader alive. Now, if you're spending a double to keep alive, say, a Master Molder, whose job is to then be spending more doubles, and Master Molder is currently probably the most popular Skaven leader, and for good reason. Master Molders are good. But if you're doing that, that's not really a combo. You're spending dice to save someone whose job is to spend dice. There's just not good resource economy there. And so those lists that do use Storm Vermin in a Rat Ogre setup, you're only using, half of the value of the Storm Vermin. You're not getting the whole package there. Whereas when you're using Hired Bodyguard to protect a Deathmaster, allowing your Deathmaster to wait until the end of the round before it commits, right? Because if in the early part of the round you use Hired Bodyguard on the Deathmaster, now your opponent has to kill the Storm Vermin if they want to do anything. Storm Vermins have toughness 5, so very few things can just roll up to a Storm Vermin and immediately kill it. It can just be a really frustrating situation for an opponent who wants to take out that Deathmaster. So then that allows Avery to kind of wait out and commit his Deathmaster as late as possible and make sure that they've got something worth killing that then can put their Deathmaster in a place where it won't get killed back. Yeah, well done, Avery, for kind of figuring this out. Kind of putting the puzzles together, creating a new build path for Skaven, which is incredibly exciting because Rat Ogre lists, I've seen quite a few of them at tournaments, and they've not been doing well. Now, they haven't been disastrous. You're not seeing people 0-4 with their Rat Ogres, but you're not seeing people do well with their Rat Ogres either, which I've thought is really interesting because Rat Ogre Packmaster combos are still really solid, but they just struggle because you can't surround them with as effective chaff. You don't have your giant rats, you don't have your plague monks to surround them with anymore. Plague monks being 10 points more than they used to be, giant rats being 30 points more than they used to be. And so a lot of the ability to kind of wait out your opponent and kind of play games with your opponent as far as the timing of your crack the whips, a lot of those are gone. Good players can still do well with those Rat Ogre lists, but overall, when you look at the stats, Skaven have not generally been doing well. And Rat Ogre lists are generally what Skaven people have been playing when you look at tournament lists. So it's really cool to see a new build path opened up. Now, kind of the elephant in the room here that I haven't even mentioned yet is the Hell Pit Abomination. And the reason it's good here in a way that is really cool, because would a Chimera be better? Yes, probably. Okay, let's get that out of the way. But what's cool about the Hell Pit Abomination, it makes it better here than it normally would be. Normally I would say the HPA is kind of on the low end as far as monster tiers, as far as points efficiency, stuff like that. But it's very good at defense. It can heal itself to manipulate its brackets. It takes a lot of effort to take one down. And more effort than it takes, with other monsters is the point here. And so that takes up so much gravity and soaks up so much of the killing power of your opponent that now you're not looking at just one thing that keeps your Death Masters alive, this Storm Vermin combo, but you're also looking at a second thing that keeps your Death Masters alive, which is just the fact that there's this giant threat on the board that's taking your opponent's attention. I know a lot of people complain about how monsters, as soon as a monster is on the board, even the ones that aren't very good, they just yell, me, 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 me. Well, Avery has done something really brilliant here where he's actually comboing with the me, me, me. The Hellpit Abomination is decent on its own. It's not amazing. It's, again, not one of the most powerful monsters. But it's providing the me, me, me screaming across the battlefield that then lets the Death Masters be the actual engine of the list, which I think is really impressive. I mean, and they better be, right? 2 Death Masters cost more than 1 Hellpit Abomination. But it's the Hellpit Abomination that really unlocks their ability to function out there. So, really cool list. And I hope other Skaven players will consider picking this up, because this is just a really beautiful blend of competitiveness, combo play, and being thematic by finding an excuse to use the Skaven monster. Whether you want to test with a Gorgon or a Chimera, which are probably better monsters than the Hellpit Abomination, be my guest with that. But I will say that the Hellpit is better here than it would be in any other list. And I do think it would probably be better than the Gorgon here, even though Gorgons, I think, are better generally. Now we have Kharadron Overlords, where Eric also went 3-1 with them. I've played a bit of KO, so I love to see it. Went with 250 points for a Mizzen Master, 140 for an Endrin Master with Endrin Harness, 190 for Endrin Rigger with the Rivet Gun, but mostly the Saw is the important part on that one. Kind of 3/4 of a Mizzen Master there. And then 2 Gruntstock Thunderers with Aether Cannon, and 4 Arcanauts with pistols. Loaded with combos here. Kharadron Overlords are one of the few warbands in the game that can be super combo heavy without needing to go with a bunch of allies. So let me kind of get into it. First of all, this list has 2 sources of Fight for Profit. Fight for Profit is kind of the premier AoE buff for Order, where if you've got a treasure or if you're near an objective, you get +2 attacks instead of just +1. And that is huge with Aether Cannons, because there's not a lot of ways to buff shooting attacks. And Aether Cannons are interesting because each dice they roll is incredibly high impact. They're 5/10 on the damage. But they only roll 1, which is too bad. Luckily, you have your Endrin Master and your Mizzen Master. The Mizzen Master can fly wherever it wants, so it can always, be available to do Fight for Profit. And so your ability to get those combos off is really consistent with this list. I think there was only 1 round where Eric didn't pull off a good Fight for Profit, and that was the 1 round that Eric lost, actually. But if you can just keep proccing that ability, you can do a ton of range damage with this list. But the cool thing is you have those crazy combos, and you still have a ton of room, right? You have 2 flyers with real melee burst damage power. Mizzen Masters and Endrin Riggers are both a little bit fragile, but they can get to wherever they want, and so as long as you're careful with them, you can do really well. And then the Endrin Master is secretly just an absolute blender in combat. You wouldn't think it because it's only 140 points, but it really is. It deals a ton of damage in combat. The base model seems like it would be more of a tank and less of a sort of blender, but for some reason it leans towards offense, which is really interesting. You also get the 4 Arcanaut with pistols. Getting 4 bodies for 200 points is always going to be really good. And the fact that those bodies have 12 wounds, 50 points for 12 wounds is ridiculous. Getting 48 wounds here for 200 points is just so much beef that you can put in front of your opponent to kind of get in the way of them being able to deal with your, much more fragile offensive engine that you have in this list is just a really important piece of utility to be able to use effectively. So really cool list, really showcases the full panoply of what Kharadron Overlords can do, and I really love to see that. Now we've got some lists from the Sutton Brothers from nearby. They're in the Twin Cities area, and they both won 3 games. One 3-1 with the Unmade, and one 3-0-1, that's 1 draw with Tzeentch Demons. I'll go with the Unmade first. A Blissful one, an Ascended one, a Joyous one, 4 Awakened ones, and then a Blood Hunter. Really simple setup, but I really love it. So the first impression I had from seeing and hearing about the list is that nets are still good. The Unmade are special because every single one of their fighters is a netter, which is really nice to have, it turns out. A lot of the other netters in the game are kind of big things with, a lot of hitting power and also a net, or they're like really little chaff models with nets. But here it's like your Ascended one and your Joyous one can either be damage output or they can be utility, which is really nice. He was able to net the Cygor every round in game 4. It only ended up being a minor victory because, the Cygor can, of course, when netted, still throw boulders everywhere. And so just kind of mowed down all of his cheap guys to still get a minor. But that's still really impressive. And I've talked in other videos about how I don't think nets are all that effective against monsters, because you net a monster, they Dragon Maul the netter, they kill the netter, now you don't have a netter, and now the monster's running around. Well, that dynamic, turns out, it actually really changes when all of your fighters are netters, which I think is worth keeping in mind. Then, of course, we have this Blood Hunter here. This is a Khorne model. It's a Khorne demon riding a Juggernaut. I'm actually looking at mine right now. So they're a really great self-contained combat mount. They only cost 230 points, 30 wounds, and DPA 3 of 9.17. That's without Onslaught active at all, and DPA 4 of 7.5. So incredibly good at just burning down chaff models with just, like, if you're willing to use Onslaught, or I think the Juggernauts have a charge ability, you can give yourself like a really, really high percentage chance of one-shot killing a 10 wound chaff model, which, a lot of people are getting off of 8 wound chaff models in general just because of how quickly they die in 4-round games. Now that's kind of changing with the Rumble Pack, but that's a thing for a different show. Being able to one-shot kill 10 wound models for only 230 points is really good. The slow mounts 6-inch move is still fast. So I think the Blood Hunter, if you're looking for a Varangard but you can't find the points, I think a Blood Hunter is a really interesting way to go there. So yeah, just a really great kind of crossing the board power piece, and incredibly self-contained. It doesn't need any help to succeed. It also doesn't help your other people succeed, but the Unmade are kind of a perfect home for that. I remember doing videos in 1st edition about how good the Unmade were when you added a Doom Bull. You wouldn't be able to fit a Doom Bull now, but a Blood Hunter is close in points to what Doom Bulls used to be, so it's really just a perfect addition. Tzeentch Demons. My big takeaway here, I'll read the list first. There's a Twistbray ally, that's the Zangor ally. An Iridescent Horror, that's the big pink horror leader. 3 blue horrors, a Pyrocaster, and a Screamer of Tzeentch for some speed. Actually, there's speed all over the place here because the Pyrocaster is 8-inch fly, the Screamer I think is 12-inch fly, and then the Twist Bray is a nice little combat piece that moves 5 inches. The thing that I really think here is that blue horrors are being slept on. You saw a Tzeentch Demons list go 3rd place, I think, in one of the week 1 tournaments in Norway. And a lot of folks, it had like a Ogroid Thaumaturge plus a bunch of horrors, mostly blue horrors, I think. I think a lot of people kind of scratched their heads and were like, eh. And then you haven't really seen people play Tzeentch Demons since. I think this is only the 2nd Tzeentch Demons list that I have any data on. So of course, incredibly small sample size, we can't see anything, but you know, seeing 2 people run Tzeentch Demons to good success is reasonably interesting. And what I will say from observing the games is that blue horrors were very, very effective. The fact that that goes off on a reaction now is just a much better use of your economy generally. And this list is really excited to be activating its other fighters early on anyway. And there's little things like you have this Pyrocaster that does really incredible range damage output. But one way to hide from it is to get into combat because it can't shoot into combat. But once you're in combat, you don't really want to be effective in combat because you don't want to kill the blue horror because then they can put their little brimstone horrors out. They can react, split. You get kill points for killing it, but you don't get ahead on whatever objective is happening. If the blue horror is carrying a treasure, it just drops the treasure right in between the 2 brimstone horrors. So it splits, and then all of a sudden you're out of combat, and now the Pyrocaster can just shoot you. So that's one nice thing with the blue horror. The other nice thing, I had 2 objective missions in this tournament pack, and blue horrors are very good at objective missions because they split. Splitting into brimstones is so effective, and it forces the opponent to chew through so much stuff. So I think if you are looking at a tournament with a lot of objective missions, Tzeentch Demons are just really good at playing the missions. And then they're decent at treasure missions too, right? Because you have so much speed on the board. Because everything that isn't a horror is just blazingly fast. So a lot to like in terms of utility with Tzeentch Demons, a lot of tricksiness with Tzeentch Demons. They finally play the way they should. I'll note that Nick, who I talked about his Cruel Boys list, he's played Tzeentch Demons to pretty solid effectiveness in our narrative campaigns as well. I do think he thinks his Cruel Boys list is better than his Tzeentch Demons list, which is why he brought that. But just to note that whether Tzeentch Demons are as good as the undefeated record that they've posted in 2 tournaments or not, that's probably small sample size with maybe some quality players at the helm, but it's definitely something that people should try out. And I think that this list is really good and a faction that's being slept on, and well done for bringing it and proving it to people. Now I've got Joe's Iron Golems. I've said in some other videos how I think that Iron Golems are one of the best bespoke warbands and actually one of the better factions in the game. And I'm glad that somebody took it to a tournament with kind of a well-tuned Iron Golems list to kind of prove that. Joe was in the finals. Joe had 3 major wins and a minor loss, so Joe actually ended up taking Best General. The list was a Dominar, an Ogre Breacher, 2 Iron Legionaries, a Drill Master, a Master Molder, and a Slaughter Priest with the big axe. Lots of cool synergies to talk about here. Every deployment group has at least one profile that gets disproportionate benefit from lead from the back. And the Master Molder is probably the best chassis to put lead from the back on because 125 points, very cheap, has more wounds than the other Skaven leaders at that sort of points cost. And then Dominars, Ogre Breachers, and the Slaughter Priest with the big axe, they all have high impact attack profiles. that when you give them 2 more attacks, like really go through the roof. So I think that random Skaven heroes are probably not as good in most lists as I think my early videos about 2.0 kind of led people to, I think, believe that putting a random Skaven hero in any chaos list could be a good way to just make them all of a sudden become a blender. I think you need to be looking at the factions that give you sort of fighters that are good on their own and also have attack profiles that benefit disproportionately from lead from the back, right? A 5 dice fighter is not going to be as good with Skaven heroes as, say, a 3 dice fighter that has the same average damage, of course. And so I think that Khorne Bloodbound has that, and Iron Golems have that. So really cool to see a Skaven ally here. And then, of course, I just mentioned Khorne Bloodbound, having the Slaughter Priest as another thing that combos with the Skaven, but then also just has that incredible pull ability that, we played 2 objective missions and 2 treasure missions. Being able to pull a treasure carrier close to you, being able to pull someone off an objective, or at least manipulate the amount of things that are on objectives. Really powerful stuff. Also, a lot of people asked right away, is the Slaughter Priest in the same deployment group as the Ogre Breacher? It wasn't. It was in its own deployment group with an Iron Legionary. And it made me wonder, I would be very curious how Joe would play this list. One thing I noted was that the Master Molder had the speed to go to any fight, and especially some of the missions would have fights that were just the perfect. The Master Molder could just move 6 inches and be in a brand new fight while still having lead from the back active. But I was thinking about how I've said in the past, and I know people have had some success doing this, having a, say, Great Bray Shaman or a Slaughter Priest in the same deployment group with a really heavy hitter can be incredibly effective because you just pull them towards your heavy hitter so that now you can use 2 attack actions instead of having to waste 1 to move. But I thought about how this list, Ogre Breachers are terrifying, but how often are they the most terrifying thing on the battlefield? Probably only about half the time. Maybe sometimes even less than that. So I think being able to pull, say, the scariest thing off the Ogre Breacher can be really valuable so that it can continue to just prey on mid-sized fighters. That's what it does so well. Any of those, say, bespoke leaders that are sitting around 170 points, any kinds of, there were a lot of sort of support heroes in this tournament. Ogre Breachers are incredible at just pasting support heroes, getting 16 damage off, getting 20 damage off really quickly. Ogre Breachers are great at doing all of that. So sort of I'd be curious what the Slaughter Priest was pulling, if it was just pulling things towards itself so it could use that big axe profile. If you have a Master Molder there and a Slaughter Priest and you're pulling it towards the Slaughter Priest and then getting buffed attacks, that's obviously incredibly powerful. But I'm just curious kind of what playstyle Joe used there, because I think you have a ton of options with this list that maybe wouldn't be clear at first glance for someone who hasn't really stared at it for a while. I also think it's significant, again, every time someone does really well with a bespoke warband, I'm always interested to see what they cut from the box. And the Armator is not here. The Prefector and the Signifer aren't here. That makes sense to me. Prefectors and Signifers are definitely the worst things in Iron Golems. But I still think Masked Armators is really good, but definitely not here, right? You can, all of the synergies I just named, none of those would be particularly spicy with Armators, so why include them, right? So this is really a well-visioned list from top to bottom. So even though when I look at the Iron Golems profiles, the fighter that I'm most interested in maximizing is what can Armators do next to a Sloppity Bile Piper. This is a totally different build than that, and I just love to see that. So great job, Joe. Finally, we have Zach Seraphon, who dominated the tournament, all the way through. Won best overall because he also won the painting award, so he just won the tournament. The list is an Annihilator Prime with a Grand Hammer and a Rune Lord in the hammer, a dagger full of Skink Priest, Saurus Warrior with spear, and a Pterodon Rider, and then a shield with Saurus Guard and a Saurus Knight with the spear. A lot to like in this list, so let's kind of get into it. The first thing is the Annihilator Prime plus a Tempestside Dispossessed Leader is just a perfect power pack of allies. You can go anywhere from 290 points to 350 points on this sort of combo power pack, depending on your preference for build of the Annihilator, build of the Dispossessed Leader, and sort of it scales really nicely. I think the 180 point Shield Annihilator Prime is really good, and the 200 point Annihilator Prime with Grand Hammer is really good. I would say the Grand Hammer is worth exactly 20 more points. You know, like the trade-off is just perfectly even, so that both are incredibly good, and I personally think equally good for their points. So it's all about how many points you want to dedicate to this combo. The same is true for the Old Guard is really good, and it goes all the way up to the Warden King being really good as far as your dispossessed leaders. The Warden Kings are 150 points. So you can kind of play around with the permutations there, and this is just an awesome sort of slingshot power pack that you can put into any order list and just give you a deployment group that is going to be incredibly hard hitting, and being able to slingshot that Annihilator Prime across the board to get it into whatever fight it needs to be in is just a terrifying thing for your opponent to have to deal with. And so I love the inclusion here. I know a lot of people have been making lists with Tempestside allies. A lot of people have been putting their Annihilator Primes into lists, and to see them both here in a as the two allies, and a lot of people build lists with the allies being meant to combo with the things in your faction. Having the allies combo with each other and just being this self-contained power pair is just a really interesting and really innovative way to approach that. And Zach, you should be really proud for coming up with it. I don't think I've seen anybody else quite do it this way. Otherwise, we've got still some really cool stuff. Saurus Knights and Pterodon Rider means both of the other deployment groups have someone really fast. The other thing is Starborn and Tearing Bite combo together really well. And this is something where I kind of showed this in my sort of tracking the Warcry meta thing, but I'll be dedicating more points to it essentially. Zach's not the only person to do pretty well with Seraphon. Seraphon have been kind of just kind of cruising, just sort of solidly above 500 for a while now. Just very few people just getting wrecked when they bring Seraphon to tournaments. And that was interesting to me because I think when I look at their stats, I think they're very middle of the pack. Now, I'd be interested to see if Zach agrees with me or not on that. But the thing that I've been really underestimating is the quality of Starborn. Starborn can neuter 2 critical hits. It can use a reaction to turn 2 critical hits into regular hits. And the really cool thing about that, I normally don't want to react with any fighter that costs more than 90 points. And as a result, reactions are kind of a hole in my game in general. I'm not very good at using them in lists that aren't built specifically to maximize them, right? If you give me a swarm list that's like, I am playing counter control. Like if I play Iron Golems, actually, I was just talking about Iron Golems, right? The way I would play Iron Golems would be to put in a Sloppity Bile Piper and just run only Iron Legionaries and Armators. And of course the Dominar that you have to do. And I would just play counter control with the really tough shields on the Iron Legionaries and the Armators, and I don't think that way of running it is any better than what Joe's done. I love that Joe's taken a different tact, but I can use counter effectively when I run a list like that. But I struggle to use reactions effectively when I'm running a list that isn't specifically based around them. And so I think I underestimate them generally. And so when I really took a look at this list and what's going on and what kind of interactions you have, Saurus have this wonderful internal synergy where if you use, say, you've just got your Saurus that's just sitting there, and the more powerful Saurus are better for this, actually. So it's cool that he's got a Saurus Knight and a Saurus Guard in here. But if you have a Saurus that's just sitting there and you use one of the reactions, you only have one action left. Normally, that's half of your offense. And so it can often be sort of questionably worth it. But for Saurus, Tearing Bite only affects one attack action anyway. And Tearing Bite is where a lot of the offensive firepower comes from in a Seraphon list, is Tearing Bite on your Saurus fighters. And so you still get most of your offensive firepower coming from your Saurus even after you've used your Starborn reaction, which is a wonderful little internal synergy in this thing to be able to threaten that if you come after a Saurus fighter, you would, like, if you charge it and attack, they can be really happy just reacting, saving themselves, saving as much damage as possible, staying in the fight as long as possible, and still not having to sacrifice a very high percentage of their damage output to do that, which I think is really, really excellent, and something that I'll be thinking about when I sort of look at Seraphon lists in the future. I have a lot of very poorly painted Seraphon because Seraphon were the Seraphon Saurus start collecting with the Carnosaur is the first Warhammer item that I purchased and the first thing that I painted. And so I have all those Saurus, and I'm interested in playing them. I don't think I would ever bring them to a tournament because the painting is so poor, but playing them on my own, I'll probably try that because now that I've seen this. Another thing I want to talk about is the kind of sub-theme of the top 6 lists, you know, the 3-1 and 4-0 and 3-0 and 1 lists from this tournament. For me, at least, is that they all had, well, half of them, 3 of them had very expensive fragile units. So in this case, the Pterodon Rider is an expensive, sort of 170 points for that glassy profile is kind of scary to run, with multiple ways to keep them alive. So in this case, you know, we just have so many distraction pieces that then have Starborn, and of course it has Starborn itself too. And so the ability to blunt incoming damage all across the battlefield is really powerful here. You see the Skaven list that is also doing something very similar with, you know, multiple defensive combos to protect its glass cannons. You see that with the Unmade, where they're just covered in nets, and then there's the Blissful One glass cannon that you just really don't want your Blissful One to die because it's so sort of high value. And so that's why you have your 5 netters across the board, and then the one sort of very loud Blood Hunter that is coming after your opponent. And then even, I didn't count the KO list for this, but Mizzen Masters and Endrin Riggers are incredibly, incredibly fragile. But then you also have the 4 Arcanaut to kind of run defense for them. Now, I didn't count this because they only have one way to keep those things alive, but that still kind of fits in the same theme of lists that combine very fragile units with very defensive units and allow the pilot to then play well, putting the defensive units where they need to be and putting the fragile units where they need to be. I think that's a really interesting way to build lists. Something that I hadn't really thought about a lot, of balancing your sort of anvil pieces with your hammer pieces, or your glass hammer pieces, really, and sort of the dance of making those two things work. And so that's something I'm going to think about a little bit more going forward. Finally, that's all the lists that I've got today, but I wanted to just talk about the fact that we've got some tournaments coming up soon. This weekend, we've got multiple tournaments. It's not too late if you're seeing this right when I post it. If you're kind of in the Midwest and near Ohio, you should go check out the Dayton Warcry Club. They are running a tournament this weekend. If you are kind of in the Mountain West and you can get out to Utah, like if you're, I don't know if Sandy, Utah is in driving distance from, say, Colorado or anywhere in New Mexico, but if it is, you should absolutely go because the Utah scene is really healthy for Warcry. They run a ton of tournaments there, and I'm really interested to see how that goes. There's also a Chilean tournament coming up this weekend, so lots of data for me to parse through at the end of this. I will have a full kind of metagame breakdown with all of the data that I've gotten since my last video where I was asking for more. There's a lot more stuff that's worth talking about now that we've gotten so many more samples. There's also, if you're in the New England area, anyone in Massachusetts or Connecticut watching this, I really hope you drive to this. I know I'm not giving you much warning, but Scourge of the Vitriol Sea is a 2-day narrative Warcry tournament, which is really, really cool. So I really encourage you to check out Captain Con and see if that's feasible for you to try out. We've got more tournaments also coming up after that. And then also to be noted, if you are in England, Warhammer World is running like 7 Warcry tournaments in the next 3 months. It's wild. I don't know. It must be someone on their events team just loves Warcry, or maybe they run that many tournaments for every game system. But it's just so cool to see that much support happening. You know, even though GW has proven that they're not really willing to support Warcry outside of England, it's really cool to see how much support they're giving for Warcry in their own game stores. So that's really cool. And so if you do live in the UK, I really suggest that you try to make it to one of those 7 tournaments. You can go to the Warhammer World website and check it out and just figure out the one that's right for you. So lots of tournaments. I'm going to have a lot more Warcry coverage coming up. If you like these kinds of list reviews, let me know. And until then, may all your rolls be crits.